En esta ocasión tenemos el placer de contar con la moderación del señor Javier Mancero, de la Comisión Económica para América Latina y el Caribe. Le otorgamos la palabra, señor Mancero.
Muchas gracias. Voy a hablar en inglés, ya que los presentadores hablan todos en esa lengua, así que welcome to this session. Its title is Developing Standards for Big Data in Crime and Justice. I should just say briefly that we're at ECLAC work mostly with national statistical offices, production of official statistics, and the issue of big data is obviously draws a lot of attention, but also a lot of caution. So it's an honor for me to present now these speakers who have lots of experience regarding this issue and that will illustrate to us some of the uses and also some of the challenges related to these data sources. We will have 4 presentations. The first one will be by Jerry Mulbrough. It will be done virtually by, she's not here now. She's the Principal Deputy Director for the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Then we will have our second presentation by Yu-Yong Sung. She's Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Penn State University. The third presentation will be by Doreen Banks. She's Director of the Courts and Corrections Program in the Center for Justice, Safety and Resilience at RTA International. And our fourth presentation will be done by Jim Lynch and Ophir Frieder. Jim Lynch is Professor and former Chair of the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Maryland, as well as Director of the Maryland Data Analysis Center. And Ophir Frieder is Chair in Computer Science and Information Processing and previously Chair of the Department of Computer Science at Georgetown University. Jerry, if you can hear me, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I am joined here with my colleague John Elting from the U.S. Census Bureau, and he's actually going to kick off the presentation for us, and then I'll jump in. So I'll give it to John.
Okay, thanks very much, Jerry. Slide 3, please.
We're not able to move the slides.
Okay. Well, while we're setting that up, I'll begin saying a few words. Good afternoon. We'd like to thank the conference organizers and the session chair for the opportunity to speak today on the opportunities in the expanded use of administrative records and other forms of so-called big data in the production of criminal justice statistics. In this talk, we'll emphasize the importance of providing transparent information to our data users regarding the quality of these data products. We'll begin with some brief comments on general concepts and methods that are important in evaluating the quality of these integrated data products. And then we'll illustrate some of these concepts with examples from the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics and some of our partner agencies. The first example discusses criminal history records that may be suitable for research purposes. And the second example involves the Federal Bureau of Investigation's National Incident-Based Report System, which are our state uniform crime reports, and again, transformation of those administrative records into information that's appropriate for research and policy analysis. Slide number 4, please. Okay, we'll begin with some general background. To a very substantial degree, statistical agencies have tended to use sample surveys in conjunction with other sources to produce high-quality statistical series, often in the form of tables. And in some cases, like the U.S. National Crime Victimization Survey, these information collection activities have also led to the production and extensive analytic use of public use microdata sets, largely for the purpose of in-depth modeling and analysis. Slide number 5, please. And that approach has been very valuable in providing statistical information on criminal justice to policymakers, research analysts, and the general public. But we're now encountering a number of major changes in our statistical environment. Some of those changes are problematic, like declining response rates and increasing data collection costs. And at the same time, some of our key data users have increasing expectations, which involve a combination of opportunities and challenges. And a third crucial factor is the increasing availability of multiple data sources that go well beyond traditional sample surveys. And most of those alternative or multiple data sources involve information we obtain from local administrative systems. They're designed primarily for making on-the-spot practical decisions, and they can also make it very challenging to use those sources for statistical and research purposes. And in a few minutes, my colleague Jerry Mulrow will be talking about many of the efforts made at the Bureau of Justice Statistics to carry out that transformation from administrative purposes to research and analysis purposes. Slide number 6, please. And the increasing availability of those administrative record data sources provides some very interesting opportunities to work with criminal justice statistics in two distinct ways. First of all, we can use integrated sources to improve the balance of quality, risk, and cost for our current statistical production. For example, expanded use of administrative records may allow us to reduce survey costs while maintaining current quality levels. And second, and equally important, integration of multiple services that we can provide in high priority areas. For example, we may be able to produce estimates at finer geographic or demographic group levels. Or by linking incarceration data with employment records, we may be able to obtain fundamentally different information that provides deeper insights into relationships among incarceration and rehabilitation efforts and employment and recidivism, tying all that information together. And in fact, the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the U.S. Census Bureau currently have this project taking place to link the National Corrections Reporting System, which consists of individual level records on prisoners released from state departments of corrections in a given year, linking that information with the longitudinal employer household dynamics, or LEHD data, to allow for analysis of post-prison earnings, employment, and occupation trajectories. And with that, I'll turn things over to my colleague, Jerry Mulrow.
Thank you, John. Slide 7, please. So John has given us a nice quick overview of some of the challenges facing the statistical system in the United States now, and some opportunities that we might have to integrate multiple data sources, and talking about the need for transparent reporting. So I want to provide a couple of examples for this from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So as a statistical agency, BJS is committed to using multiple data sources for statistics to meet the national need for criminal justice information, being open and transparent about the data sources and limitations of those data, widely disseminating the data, and upholding quality and professional standards. Next slide, please. So I want to frame, that went back, words. Okay, so to fulfill those goals, BJS often uses administrative records. In evaluating the quality of the resulting statistical work, it's critical to remember that administrative records are just that, records designed and managed primarily for the administration of specific cases and not necessarily for the production of aggregate statistical reporting or analyses. Consequently, it's critical to be quite explicit in thinking about our specific statistical goals, the needs of our data users, and the access, and to seek to assess the statistical quality or fitness of use of the given administrative records. Next slide, please. So I want to frame my examples around these three broad dimensions of quality, those related to representation, measurement, and processing. Questions related to representation include, do the data sources cover the population of interest? How do the pieces fit together? Are there duplicates? Can they be identified? What items are missing? Can the gap be identified? Is it a census or a sample? Are there missing item level data, and how much? Questions related to measurement include, do the existing sources provide reasonable measures of the concepts of interest? Are these measures consistent over time? If not, is this something that can be tracked? Are the definitions used in alignment with the measures, and are they the same over different units? If not, is there a reasonable way to standardize the data to adjust for these differences? And then questions related to processing. Who provides the data and for what purpose? How often are the data updated? By whom and why? Are these existing codes or recodes in the data? How are they created, updated, by whom and why? Has the processing changed over time, and is it trackable? What metadata are available? So we have a lot of questions that sometimes the answers are not known for administrative data sources, but they're still important. And at BJS, we are concerned with these dimensions. So let me go through my first example. Next slide, please. This example is using U.S. criminal history records, or rap sheets as they're often known. There are over 100 million U.S. criminal history records. These are not unique individuals, as an individual may have more than one criminal history record in more than one state. These records are created at the time a person is arrested and fingerprinted at one of more than roughly 18,000 local law enforcement agencies scattered across the country. A new record is registered at the state level, and subsequent events are appended to an existing record. So these records are housed in 50 different state repositories and the FBI repository. BJS has encountered several issues related to representation and processing when it began to start using these records for statistical purposes. First of all, duplicates definitely exist. Like I said, an individual may have more than one criminal history record if they have arrests in more than one state. So a pointer system has been developed and created that can locate and provide different state records for the same individual. Obviously, this is helpful for both law enforcement and for researchers to put the data records together. A criminal history record may be completely missing in some cases, or have missing information if the fingerprints of an individual are rejected or can't be read and matched. However, the use of technology over time, such as live scan electronic fingerprinting, has helped to reduce this problem. So recently, for example, a sample of prisoners that we looked at that were released in 2005, we were able to obtain 99% of the requested records, or all but 682 of the 68,000 records that we were individuals that we were requesting records for. So we had a 99% match rate, which was excellent. These data also experience item level missing data. This varies across states and across time. Historically, these records have covered felonies and serious misdemeanors. However, automation has made it easier for agencies to report less serious offenses. So the records are becoming richer over time in the types of offenses that they can capture. BJS has found some systematic patterns in the presence or absence of final disposition codes, and we are working with various entities to address these patterns. Next slide, please. Because these records are created at the time of arrest, there are also issues related to measurement. First, each state has its own set of statutes, regulations, criminal codes, and procedures. There is some commonality across the 50 states, but there is also a good deal of variability. In addition, each state has its own record format, although there is some standardization of this format starting to occur. The information is organized differently with different field names and different codes across different states. And third, the criminal history records are text-based. So all of these present challenges when trying to use for statistical purposes. BJS has worked diligently over the years to address some of these challenges. But first, I thought it might be interesting to see a couple of examples of criminal history records. Next slide, please. So this shows an example. It's text-based. The boxes represent date of arrest and the offense statute for a particular state. Next slide, please. This is an example of a criminal history record from a different state, and the boxes represent the same information that was shown for state A. And next slide. And again, another state record, which is even different. So these data are not in its native format particularly amenable to statistical research methods. So it's taken quite a bit of time for BJS to figure out how to use and standardize these types of records. The first, next slide please, was we had to gain access to these records. That was no small feat, and it took us about 2 years to gain access to all the different state repositories. In the next step, we had to begin working to figure out how to standardize the format of these criminal history records. As I showed you, the states have all different formats. BJS helped to develop a standardized format and then some parsing routines to take the text-based information and create a standardized rap sheet. We actually moved the original text strings into this standardized format. And then in step 3, we needed to create a standardized set of criminal codes so that we could map the individual state statutes into those standardized codes. This work was initially very labor intensive because people had to review and interpret the different state statutes and then map them into the standardized codes. BJS worked diligently with state representatives to be sure the interpretations are correct. And finally, we were able to automate this with a series of crosswalks that can now be used and maintained to map state codes into the standardized codes. Finally, we are beginning to use these data and are beginning to be able to evaluate and improve the quality. So this was this project took quite a bit of time and quite a bit of effort over the last several years. But the fruits of these labor were just have been realized, and we have recently released a 9-year recidivism study using these criminal history records as the basis. Can I do a time check here? I think we're close to our time.
You have 1 minute left.
Okay, maybe we should run to the summary part of it, piece of it. So we'll move to slide 13, 18. Move to slide 19, please.
Okay, so in summary, we believe that expanded use of administrative records at the Bureau of Justice Statistics and many of our partner agencies provide a great opportunity to improve the balance of quality, risk, and cost in different statistical publications and analyses, and also to expand the suite of statistical information that we provide to many of our stakeholders in critical areas of criminal justice statistics. Next slide, please. And practical implementation of that effort requires transparent reporting to all of our stakeholders in ways accessible to them on dominant quality features, including both accuracy dimensions like population coverage, linkage errors, definitional errors, and inconsistencies, as well as qualitative dimensions like timeliness, relevance, comparability, coherence, and accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we'll move on to the next presentation, crime prediction and using social big data in Korea. Yu Young, please.
Hello, my name is Ju-Young Song. I'm from Penn State University, and thank you very much for inviting this presentation. Crime prediction using big data. I wrote a book in Korean with my father. He is a data scientist for about last 35 years, and then we try to connect with these in criminological field. It's on the way to translate in English in later of this year or early next year. So what is big data? There's no single definition, but here's the definition from Wikipedia, which means that big data is a term for the collection of the data sets so large and complex that it becomes difficult to process using a traditional technology or the on-hand database. So the challenges can include capture, curation, storage, search, sharing, transfer, analysis, and visualization. Some of the characteristics of big data. Some of the characteristics of big data, we can say like 4 V's, which is first is volume, which means that the size is big. And then the second one is variety, which means that the types or the nature of the big data. And then the third one is a velocity, which means that the data in motion. And the last one is the veracity, which is really important to whenever we're doing the analysis accurately. So the crime prediction, no. Oops. Back, please. Yes. The crime phenomena in the modern society is more complex and diverse, so there may be different ways to predict a crime analysis. The machine learning is one of the way the learning process, it uses traditional database to then predict new data of those properties. So I use the social big data. The current presentation includes different types of topics like text mining and opinion mining. And I'm going to show you the machine learning process, and then I'm going to show you some of the examples for the visualization of the crime prediction. The research will include 2 examples. First one is the sexting, and the other one is a prediction for the risk factors on cyberbullying and delinquency. So stay alert, forecasting the risks of the sexting in Korean using social big data. This is already published in Computers and Human Behaviors in this year, April. The methodology that I used is collecting those text-based web transactions through like 156 online channels, including news blogs and news site, bulletin board, and social network service. The topics related to sexting were conducted from January 2011 to almost like 4 years and 3 months. And then among those documents, over 65,000 total hits. I used like over 13,000 text transactions were related to teenagers. So after the collection of the social big data, this was conducted by the Korean telecommunication company. The highlights for the study is that employed the association analysis methodology by data mining and decision tree mentioned by using social big data. And then the study performed the data mining analysis and on 8 factors, or the content factors and the types of factors of sexting. This is the process of the how social big data analysis. The first step is we target the sources. Like, for example, if I want to know about the cyberbullying, then we collect the keywords first. And then we get rid of those stop words, such as not related to the cyberbullying, essentially. And then after that, we can do some of the analysis, as I mentioned, by the text mining or opinion mining or the keywords analysis. By using this, based on the structured analysis, unstructured database, we're going to make this as a structured type. And after that, we're going to find those future risk factors. We call this as like a future signals by using some of those keywords. Again, the first step is that collecting those cyberbullying documents from different types of resources. So all of the online documents, this was a different research, one of the supported by the National Foundation of Korea. From like almost like 4 years, I collected the online documents containing cyberbullying related to words retrieved by the crawler. We call this as a computer Word document crawling robot. Almost 12 million documents are collected. And then I posted by the adolescent and age 19 or younger, which was a 35,000 documents were collected in analysis. The next step is that text mining and opinion mining. In regards to the text mining, there are two technologies. First one is a bottom-up, and the other one is a top-down. Top-down is usually like creating those ontologies based on the theoretical perspective. So I usually use the criminological theory, which is like string theory or different types of cyberbullying-related ontologies. Or the bottom-up methodology is that creating those dictionaries. This is too small to see, but there are a lot of different types of words, each stage by stage. So first step, second step, and third step, and then I categorize like 4 different types of steps. And then, in regards to the opinion mining, I created those opinions such as like a negative emotions or the positive emotions or neutrals in those social cyberbullying issues. Now I'm going to show you one of the visualization for the cyberbullying. This is creating by the computer software R. This is a word cloud of strain factors related to cyberbullying. As you can see in the middle, there is like a school control or school record seems a very important concept for the cyberbullying. And next step is the prediction of the future signal of cyberbullying, which is that, as you can see here, there is a weak signal goes to the strong signal. I'm going to show you how to create those weak signals and strong signals. Usually, the future signals we're going to find based on those TF, DF, and TF, IDF, which means that TF is the term frequency, and then DF is the document frequency, and TF, IDF means that the term frequency inverse document frequency. So, based on this, the future signals here, the first one is a keyword emergence map, and the other one is, the middle one is the keyword issue map. If you see those strong signals, and A and C can show as a future signal. And if you are going to the latent signals, then H and I and J goes to the latent signal. And there are some future signals that strong for now, but goes to the weak for the later. So I create those TF and DF documents based on the future signal map. So what is the keyword emergency map? I'm going to show you this one. Keyword emergency map is a, it shows the degree of the visualization, the visibility. And then keyword issue map shows the degree of the diffusion. So based on these Chem and Kim, we can create those future signals based on all of those online documents that created from the social big data. So the main findings are here, main signals. As you can see, there are a lot of different types, such as like social class or the school control or the other things. And the next step is that finding a very good model to predict what is the main point for those traditional database to the new data. This shows a decision tree model. Decision tree model is one of the technology that we can use in machine learning. So if you can see here, the relation to the school control factors were presented in the online documents. Then delinquency or cyberbullying increased from 17.5% to 40.2%. Or if it was both school control and transfer, then delinquency increased from 40% to almost 80%. Another analysis methodology is that association rules, which means that association analysis is discovering the correlation between two or more, including the single online documents. The next one is that social network analysis. It also showed that school control is an important factor in relate to the cyberbullying in South Korea. The final one is that we're going to show you the more complicated methodology. It's really similar to our neural system. So we call this as a neural network analysis. The multi-layered neural network in the study includes 25 strength factors in the input layer and the hidden layers. And after that, with the output of the layer showing that the status of the delinquency, yes or no, or cyberbullying in schools, and as a result, the probability of delinquency for all strength factors of the school violence or school bullying was like a 35% on average. So this is how to create all the codes. Can conclude this as a neural network analysis. Finally, machine learning model developed is applied to the online documents are generated every day. So risk level, each factors could be continuously monitored and predicted. In addition to making a real-time prediction or take timely measures on complex social phenomena such as crime or the cyberbullying issues, we need to develop a technologies and standardized methodology of big data analysis will have to develop. As a data scientist or the criminologist who can extract this meaningful information hidden on the large volume of data to be developed. Thank you very much for listening for my presentation.
Thank you very much. Don't forget, we can collect your questions and so that the speakers can answer them at the end. We move on to the next presentation by Duran Banks, Utility of Open Information Sources in Developing Estimates of Selected Crime and Justice Indicators, Measuring Arrest-Related Deaths. Please, your floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I'm Duran Banks. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today about this project we've been working on with the Bureau of Justice Statistics for the past several years. I'd like to acknowledge we have a fairly large research team that has been very helpful in doing various stages of this project that I'll walk through in just a few moments. I also want to acknowledge that the information I'm going to present here today does not represent the BJS or the federal government. It's the opinions and the findings that we at RTI International have concluded. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about our project which measures arrest-related deaths in the United States. I'm going to use a couple of different terms related to that. Arrest-related deaths is all individuals who die during the process of arrest or while in the custody of law enforcement in the United States. So this includes individuals who die from police use of force, so for example being shot or tased by a law enforcement officer. But arrest-related deaths also includes individuals who might die from suicide, an accident, or from natural causes, again, while they are in the process of arrest. Law enforcement homicides, again, those deaths that are due to police use of force, are the largest proportion of arrest-related deaths. And there's many data collections that focus specifically on law enforcement homicides and others that focus on the broader phenomenon of arrest-related deaths. So what I'm going to cover today is some of the problems that we've had in the U.S. of counting arrest-related deaths in state and local law enforcement agencies. We did a pilot study that looked at new and different ways to count this issue. So I'm going to talk in particular about how we use big data and some of the same techniques that were in the previous presentation to comb through open information sources to get what we think is a more accurate count of the number of deaths in the United States. And finally talk about the second component to our methodology, which is going directly to law enforcement agencies to collect more information about the deaths that have occurred and to validate the information that we've collected from open information sources. So BJS started the ARD program back in 2003. It relied on a centralized state reporting approach to collect this information. This follows what the FBI in the United States has done to collect summary information from law enforcement agencies across the U.S., where the 18,000 individual law enforcement agencies are dispersed across the 50 states. There's a centralized reporting coordinator in each of the 50 states that then reports that information to the FBI in their UCR summary statistics. And we followed, again, the same model for the ARD program. The issue was that it was difficult often to find a centralized point of contact in each state that had the resources to accurately engage each of the law enforcement agencies in the state, and also to define and identify these deaths and report them to BJS. BJS provided these SRCs with guidance, but really relied on them to use their own resources to identify the deaths. And what BJS found, though, was that it was getting about 400 deaths a year. This is fairly similar to what the FBI was getting in its count of law enforcement homicides, and also the CDC collects information from medical examiners and coroners through its vital statistics system, which also collects information on law enforcement homicides. Each of these three sources got about 400, 500 deaths a year. But what BJS found was that in 2011, it started looking through open information sources to supplement its voluntary reporting system. And in 2011, it got nearly 700 deaths, which was more than it had gotten in previous years. And so BJS became concerned that perhaps they were not capturing all of the deaths that happened throughout the US, and was not putting out statistics that were a full enumeration of the number of deaths in the US. So they contracted with my company, which is RTI International, to do what was a capture-recapture analysis, where we compared the deaths that were reported to these different systems and to provide an estimate of how many deaths were being missed. So you see here in the graph, the blue bar that's across the middle of the screen, about the 400 to 500 deaths that were reported to the ARD program each year. We estimated that the ARD program was missing about half the number of homicides in the US, so was undercounting, by 50%. And again, as you can see here too, the reported number grew in 2011, and so the coverage, the amount that the ARD program was missing, was less after BJS began to rely on open information sources. So what we designed then was an approach that combined the voluntary reporting with open information sources. So we had the first phase was what I'm going to talk specifically about today, is how we use big data and data science techniques to comb through media articles to identify arrest-related deaths. The second phase, which I think is an important component of this, is that we did not rely solely on what is reported in the news media to identify this, this issue. We validated it with law enforcement agencies, and in particular, we talked to law enforcement agencies to learn about the circumstances surrounding these deaths. We did not rely on the news media to tell us what the individual was charged with, how many officers responded to the event, how many shots were fired. We went straight to the law enforcement agencies to get that information. Again, under the assumption that the law enforcement agencies were likely the best source to tell us about the context of the incident. And that context is really what's most important, I think, to inform policy and practice. But particularly the starting point here was to get a solid enumeration of the total number of arrest-related deaths in the US. So this is an overview of our entire process for combing news media sources to, again, what we were trying to do was just identify each unique arrest-related deaths in the US. And once we identified these deaths, then we would go to the law enforcement agencies involved and ask them more information about those deaths. So on the left side of the screen is we had an event listener that used keywords that I'll talk more about in just a moment to comb through news articles and pull down that information. You see in the middle over there on the left, the text processing box. We kick out exact duplicates, so often the same news story is picked up by multiple outlets and repeated. So an exact news media article we kicked out. We also kicked out what we called untrusted domains. We did not include social media. We did not include quote, news articles from sources that may have a political position. Our intent was to get the most official news sources as possible, so we had a number of untrusted domains that we did not take information from. And I'm going to talk more in particular about the data science approach that is on the right-hand side of the screen here. So as I mentioned earlier, our first step was this event listener, where we looked at keywords in combination with keywords that indicated the types of arrest-related deaths we were interested in combination with a law enforcement involvement. So combining these, we then had over 1 million articles a month to deal with. Ultimately, we want to get down to the articles that are most likely to identify an arrest-related death. So when we try to deduplicate here, again, the first thing we did was kick out the untrusted domains and the exact duplicates. And we did a text similarity detector next. So this basically looks at how similar the text associations are within articles to determine if they're talking about the same event. So the example at the bottom, which I'm sure is hard to read, is there's 2 stories about the same event. The terminology and the way the phrases and terms are used are very similar. So our machine learning classifier recognizes that these are talking about the same event and deduplicates from here. We got about 270,000 articles kicked out each month on this approach. The next thing we did was look at something called entity similarity. And so this looks at named entities in each article. So if we had the same individuals named, the same places named, perhaps the same law enforcement agency named, again, our program recognizes that these are talking about the same incident and deduplicates it. The machine learning component then is really based on what we've learned from reviewing these articles so far. And this is really the last step. And it combines several approaches that were discussed in the previous presentation. A couple of regression models, a neural network analysis, and also a decision tree model as well. So basically, it takes what it has learned. We started with 100,000 articles, and we had individual reviewers code each of those articles to determine if it was an arrest-related death. Fed that information back into our classifier, and it used it to determine which additional articles that we're pulling down are likely to identify an arrest-related death. So what happened then is that once our classifier kicked out the articles that are most likely to identify one of these deaths, we had individual humans go in and review each of the articles and take out identifying information. They looked at the identity of the person who died, the law enforcement agency involved, the date of death, and the state of death. And again, this was intended to uniquely identify each individual death and then to provide enough information to go to the law enforcement agencies so that we could ask them to confirm the death and to give us some more information about it. So the steps that I've mentioned thus far is kind of culminates in this summary here of how we were able to reduce 1 million articles a month from our web crawler down to about the 8,000 that our reviewers coded manually. So again, starting with 1 million, about 500,000 kicked out because they're exact duplicates or untrusted domains, and then you can see the reduction that goes on in a typical month here. So from the 8,700 that our reviewers are looking at manually, about 1,200 each month identified a unique arrest-related death. Now some of them referred to the same death, but about 1,200 articles met the definition that we were looking for. So the next few slides just talk a little bit about our experience over the past couple of years in doing this work. The blue articles represent how many the blue bars represent how many articles we retrieve each month that meet our definition. And so starting early in October 2015, we were only getting about 50,000 articles a month. It exploded over the course of this study, where we're now getting in the realm of, again, as I said, 500,000 or more articles a month. The green bar is how many articles were actually manually reviewed. So the delta between the blue and the green is what the machine learning classifier did for our reviewers in helping them not to have to read so many articles. And then the black bar the black line that runs across is the proportion of articles retrieved that we had to review each month. And I will say you'll see a general upward trend in the blue bars. The company that we contract with to crawl the web is constantly changing how it interfaces with available news media sources, and news sources are popping up all the time. So we're getting an increasing volume as we continue this project. The next slide shows you, again, the distinction in what we've seen over time and how many articles were manually reviewed. So the green bar here, again, is what you saw on the previous slide of how many articles we're having to manually review, and the yellow bars at the bottom demonstrate how many each month are identifying an arrest-related death. You will see that there's some spikes in several of these these charts, and that's because a high-profile event happened in the United States. The particular spike you see here in July 2016, there was an arrest-related death that was live-streamed over Facebook. There were also some protests related to some officers being found not guilty in another city in the U.S., and there was also a protest from Black Lives Matter where some officers were shot. And all these happened in about the same proximity, which, again, demonstrates some of the spikes that's happened. So lastly, I wanted to demonstrate that over time, despite the fluctuating volume and how many articles we pull down and spikes and how many were reviewed, we've seen a pretty consistent number in the actual amount or level of arrest-related deaths that had been identified each month. And those range from about 550, 560 a month, 150 a month. And that's this low bar that's down here, the orange bar at the bottom. So basically what we found here is, as I mentioned earlier, with the previous ARD program, that's this black line across the bottom, thinking just about law enforcement homicides, we were getting about 60 a month. With this new approach, the dark green bar is the number of law enforcement homicides that we're identifying with the approach that I've been describing. And then the combination of the light and dark green bars is the total number of arrest-related deaths. As I mentioned, about 60% of all arrest-related deaths are law enforcement homicides, and the remaining are suicides, accidents, and deaths due to natural causes. So again, we think we're doing a better job than the traditional method of the ARD program. And I wanted to point out too, if I can get back, is this is a summary of some of the other official data sources in the US that have tracked law enforcement homicides. And the light blue bar there is what the ARD program has done over time. And you can see an increase from the change in methodology in 2011 to what we used in 2015 and 2016. So I want to wrap up, but just say that an important component here is the hybrid approach to data collection, where relying on news sources is not enough. We constantly look back at, we reserve a random sample of articles that we did not use in our various models, and constantly test what the reviewers are finding with these articles on that reserved random sample. And I just want to mention too that having a human coder at the end of the day, looking at what's in the article, confirming that it meets our scope, and then a critical component that I'm not going to speak to today, but is going to the law enforcement agencies and medical examiners and coroners and asking them to confirm that the death occurred, that it meets the definition. And also a critical component is asking if we've missed any. In the first survey that we did for these agencies, we did a pilot study, and we found that we were missing about 10%. So the number we started out with, inflate that by 10%. That was how many deaths agencies told us that we had not found in news media. A couple of those we were able to find going back through our articles and again updated our classifiers, but several of them were not reported in the media at all. So I just want to emphasize the importance of relying on multiple sources and not just on the methodology I've described here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duran. We'll move on to the next presentation, Toward an Error Profile for Open Source Data in Crime and Justice by Jim Lynch and Ophir Frieder.
Thank you. I want to correct one thing. Roberto said something about that the people on the panel knew a lot about the topic. And the only thing I bring to this topic is ignorance. But I think ignorance sometimes is useful. So this is something that I became interested in when I was on a National Academy of Science panel on big data with Ophir, who is my co-presenter here. And every time somebody came in with a big data innovation, some of the statistical agencies were presenting, Ophir would sit there and say, they did it all wrong, you know? And so, but I realized that I couldn't evaluate his evaluation at all because I didn't know anything about this stuff. I found it very difficult. I was trained in traditional statistics and things, so that my ability to understand these new techniques was quite limited. So I use this as an opportunity to share with you my ignorance and some questions I have about how you assess quality with this new methodology. So obviously everybody's said this, there is an information explosion. We've been able to, as the presenters have shown, we've been able to harness and structure and use information that we've never been able to use before. But as I say, these new methods of data collection are using techniques that many of us are not familiar with, and I think that we need to begin a discussion with other disciplines and subdisciplines, in this case with Ophir and computer science, and begin to create categories by which we can think about the quality of the data that's being used, the quality of the techniques, and the fitness for use. And that's a little what we're trying to do today. I think what we like to do is we like to follow what has been done in I think one back there. So we take sort of what John and Jerry talked about, the idea that establishing fitness for use in sample surveys, that's sort of the gold standard for old folks like me who think about what quality in data means. And when we get an article to review and it uses survey data, we know what to look for in terms of what is, we look for the sample size, response rates, we look at instrument design, we look at procedures, the modes used and things like that. And we take a look and we associate those design decisions that people made with errors so that we know that smaller samples give you more sampling error, response rates give you bias and sampling error. So we know how to look at things, and we send them to journals. The people who review things in journals know what to do with them in that sense. So that's a little what we're trying to do here with open source data. What we'd like to do is identify the major design features of open source data collections, identify the errors resulting from these design decisions, and then identify the information that should be provided to readers to allow them to establish fitness for use. So we'd like to go through that in our discussion today. And then at the end, we'd like to talk about, there's a lot of things we don't know about some of these errors that we're talking about, and we'd like to propose that some research be done in those areas. Now, this is going to be a duet. This has to be a duet because there's many of the techniques that are used here I don't know anything about. And so I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then Ophir is going to talk. And all those pieces where Duran said, we're going to skip that. That's the pieces he's going to talk about. So, and then we'll both come back and finish at the end. So let me talk about the design decisions. You've seen them already in the two excellent presentations that were just given on this kind of open source data. You've seen what these design decisions are. The first design decision is choosing the population of sites and sources to be considered. And in many ways, this is the decision in need of most attention, I think, in some ways. The second thing is, once you have these sites, population of sites identified, you filter the sources to find likely events of interest. And then once you find the likely events of interest, whether it be some kind of bullying or whether it be the police shootings, then you unduplicate those because there's a lot of duplication, and you're trying to reduce the information to something that's manageable so that you can humanly code it in an efficient way, I think. And so you want to get those duplicates out, and then you find the relevant events. Once you've unduplicated things, then you find the relevant events, just as the previous two authors have done. And then you turn the humans loose on that pile of information and that thing. Another step in the process that Duran has a particular way of doing is the idea of getting additional information on the event. You identify the event, but a lot of times the article that identifies the event doesn't have all the attributes that you want. So you need to get other sources of information to fill in the kinds of, and then establishing, Providence is a city in Rhode Island. I meant Providence in that sense. So the idea that you can identify events that do not exist, fake news. It's a form of error that's kind of strange. You get it in surveys when someone lies to you. You know, but you have control over those surveys, so you can begin to test it and see. But it's much harder in this kind of endeavor. So that's another kind of step that's involved in this kind of thing. So I think choosing the population of sites and sources, this has important implications for selectivity and bias in the resulting data. So some people can just go to Google and start to search, and other people go to data aggregators. So there are data aggregators, like the Wall Street Journal is one of the big ones. So they aggregate sites and sources from all over, trying to provide the fodder that you need for this project. Other people might have much more modest and limited. Some research projects like START, the global terrorism database, they need to have search sources. The Wall Street Journal wasn't enough for them because they have, a lot of their stuff is international, so they had to look for a different set and combination of aggregators to give them the population of sites that they should look at. So I think this is it's kind of a black box. You know, people hire their aggregators or do their search, and the question is, does it have everybody? So there's need to do a certain amount of demonstration that at this stage in the process you have actually identified all of the important kinds of things. So that's the first stage in the process. Now, Ophir, if you can like that in the New Yorker where the guy says, "Now a miracle happens." This is what we're going to talk about now.
Thanks. So basically, I'm the person that is supposed to clean up what I find is odd or what I find is difficult technology. Jim said that basically he's ignorant on one side, I'm ignorant on the other. So we're hoping that two wrongs does make a right, but I wouldn't bet on it. The reality is we had lots of technology. We heard a presentation that talked about all these big data techniques in machine learning. Then we had a presentation by Duran that talked about all the reliance, and the key message that came out of it is don't rely on one source and don't count on one source. It gets even much uglier when you start talking about truly open source data, such as all the blogs and the like that are basically have no control over. First of all, words that you heard of is get rid of duplicates. That sounds like a great idea. It sounds like pretty straightforward, and it is if you have exact duplicates. The truth of the matter is that there's a lot of not so exact duplicates, and so instead of them being exactly syntactically the same, they are similar in nature. But the discussion of how to deal with entities, to be able to map the entities onto one another, that's also not so straightforward. It's not so straightforward because people refer to different people by different things in different jargon. If you talk about how you refer to the president, and we won't comment on how I refer to our president, you have different terminology of what is being used throughout. So even when you try to identify the entities, it's not that straightforward. So the similarity by syntax doesn't work. Similarity by content is not very easy. And the reality is, if you do not get rid of the similarity, you will way overcount or way undercount, depending on what granularity you do to the information you have. Because what's going to happen is if you don't detect a similar item, it will count twice. If you detect the wrong items as similar, it'll count none. So that's a problem either way. Now, if I can figure this out, being an engineer, I guess not. Okay. Pointed down. Very good. All right. So to keep it going a little flowing, as I said, you better watch out what you get rid of. How do you know what you're getting rid of? Make sure your algorithms are available. The reliance on open source software systems, and I'm differentiating between the data and the data in the machines, the software that you use to process the data. Any mistake in any software you develop, you won't know unless somebody else has fine-tuned and checked it. So the reliance on a lot of search technology on open source data, open source software, such as Lucene or Elasticsearch or the like, is a savior for being able to make sure that you do not make mistakes. Because everything that you develop is very error prone. You need to validate what you're using by having some kind of an assessment of the results you're getting. Namely, if you do some search and all of a sudden you're finding a very, very small amount after duplication, or you're doing a search and you find a huge amount of results and they seem to be quote unquote spot checked is off, you need to be able to know that. So the goal is make sure you don't have you better limit your false positives, even to the fact that you might actually allow some false negatives. What? So much for my engineering. All right. Basically, make sure your quality of what you're doing is solid. Have a set of validation criteria. Do a lot of regression testing on every change you do. Make sure that the results you get match what you're expecting. Use a lot of training data and validate that what you're doing is correct. And make sure that you report the algorithms you're actually using. Even for cases where the data is confidential, the algorithms quite often are not. So try to make your algorithms public as much as you can. And the one thing you do need to talk about, and Duran mentioned that she basically got rid of some suspicious sites. The United States, if you've been following anything about the news, the big headline is Russia. And when you actually look at it, they didn't go and hack into our systems. They didn't go break in. They didn't modify the voting booths. What they do is they create a large amount of false news and unreliable information, and it's very, very difficult to spot this information, particularly when you talk about open source. The standard way people do it is they say we count the number of sites repeats, and if the sites aren't enough, then it's probably not a valid source. But then again, it's easy to replicate many, many ways and many, many different versions to avoid your duplicate detection algorithm, your similarity detection algorithm. And now you've got a variety of information scattered all over the place that's all false. And the degree of bias introduced is dramatic. When I was in this panel, I showed the panel that I can actually prove to you that cigarette smoking is good for your health. And the way I proved it is because those that suffer from a heart attack that smoked recovered quicker. And they did that because they were also about 25 years younger. So a lot of information you collect in big data has got a bunch of bias introduced, and you do not know the background behind it. So the cardinal rule is watch out for bias. And now, not that I'm pointing to bias, but Jim, you're up.
So all of these things all these sort of negative statements that we're making about this methodology is, you know, just to counterbalance the euphoria that most people have about it. Being an old curmudgeon myself, it's a habit, but it's also something that we have to pay attention to. So I think that what happens here in most of the errors that we're talking about is that selectivity is introduced into the data, either whether it's at the first stage when you've decided who your aggregator is going to be, or where you have false positives and negatives at the other stage. And so the greater selectivity due to these design decisions, the less fit the data are for use in some ways. I mean, it's a pretty simplistic so I think that pretty simplistic idea. I think that there are certain information should be provided to allow consumers to assess fitness for use. The method of aggregation used and information on the data aggregator should be provided. I think methods of the deduplication employed should also be made available. Filtering and relevant algorithms used and methods of validation and training should also be described and in some cases made available. This sounds like a tremendous burden, I think, but we're just doing it We're just opening up this discussion, not finishing it in that sense. But so there are things we need to investigate. I think the coverage of different data aggregators by substantive domain would be something that would be a great subject for a methodological article in the Journal of Quantitative Criminology or some statistical journal where people in the justice area are, so that they have some idea of the coverage of their subject matter by these different aggregators and sources. I think this is methodological work that's going to have to be done. The relative accuracy of various methods of validating target events is also something that could be the subject of discovery. And I think methods for detecting fake news. I mean, the Global Terrorism Database folks told me that they found 9 events where Obama had been assassinated. And so obviously they knew that one wasn't true. But other than that, it gets a little harder when things aren't quite so famous in that sense. So I think these are some thoughts about how we can begin to build the body of knowledge that we need, so that when they see the analyses of high quality that we've just seen, that we're not sitting there with this residual suspicion, wondering, is this right? Did they get everybody? How much selection's going on here? So I think, again, this is just the beginning step. We're trying to enlist people to interest them in doing this kind of work so that we can use this wonderful resource in a cautious way. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. For the presentation, we have, I think, a couple of minutes left for the questions. We have received 3 questions. One is, and I will make these other 2 questions, which are general, so any one of you who can take it. I will translate. The first one says that countries with a weak infrastructure, technological infrastructure, and low connectivity, if they can implement such a system of criminologic prediction that is trustworthy, prediction of crime in a country with weak infrastructure and low connectivity. And the other question is if it is easy to obtain data mining from the subject to investigate. It doesn't state which subject. Maybe I should rephrase it that which should be the difficulties facing obtaining the data for data mining.
How easy is it to obtain the data for the data mining? And so I can answer from the project that I've worked on. We paid a data aggregator to crawl websites and to give us the information. We have 2 vendors that do this, and one of them, and again, it's a pay for service, a pay fee for service. One of the vendors gives us the URLs and the locations of the individual articles, and then we go to a separate vendor to actually pull down the text and hold that text into a database. So the obstacles that you encounter here, as the last presentation mentioned, is different aggregators might have different levels of coverage, so that's something to take into account. Another obstacle is obviously housing all of this information, so not only the millions of articles we now have, but of course the text that makes up those articles as well. So there's essentially, our whole project was efficiencies versus cost. We could have somebody read 500,000 articles a month, but frankly, we don't have the resources to do that. And so when you're thinking about how easy it is to get the information, it may be very easy to get it, but then actually do something with it is the harder part.
The question was, the machine learning is usually seen as a powerful tool for the prediction of the present study, and it couldn't help determine risk factors. But I think it's really similar to the other question, because the particular countries that, for several reasons, they're not able to report traditional resources and methodologies. Is it be possible to infer a rate of a particular crime by using big data resources? I think we can do some of the ways that in South Korea have been done is that we did similar researches about the analysis of social big data. For example, if there is a increasing rate of the adolescent suicide, or some issues that maybe there are a lot of notions that some of the famous star killed herself, then the suicide trends or the suicide rate is surprisingly increased. And for example, for the cyberbullying issues, some of the newer semester starts, there are a lot of transfers where the school districts have like new friends, new schools, new teachers. That also increases the cyberbullying as well. So such that within those previous researches, by using these types of technologies, for those of the countries who does not have particular resources, I assuming that they can do some of the prediction analysis. Not specifically, they cannot tell the particular crime rate itself, but we can assuming either it's decreasing or increasing in some specific crime.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add? No? Okay, then I ask a big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much for being here.